Hey everybody, I'm Chris List, and this is the 5 O'Clock Hustle Podcast.
5 O'Clock Hustle.
Okay. All right, so we're recording. Welcome to the 5 O'Clock Hustle Podcast. I'm here with myself, Christopher List, and my co-host. Introduce yourself, Mr. Co-host.
Dre Curtis.
Okay. We're actually going to not have that in the show. That needs some work, for reals. But anyways.
We're probably going to put it in just to show you that we started from this point, but we're going to get so much better.
What doesn't... No, I'm not even going to...
Don't do it to
I'm not
yourself.
going to do it.
Don't do
but
it
anyways, this,
Kelly
like
Clarkson.
I said, this is the 5 O'Clock Hustle Podcast. It's a podcast for all the weekend warriors and after-hours entrepreneurs who are trying to make something of themselves.
Chris made up that term, so don't try and steal it.
Don't try and steal it. I think when you put it on a podcast, you actually own it forever. Maybe.
Is that how it works now?
No.
Is that Creative
Commons?
Creative Commons?
I don't know. I don't even know what that means. It just sounds cool. Creative Commons.
It's a
This is the
commons.
Creative Commons podcast. I'm going to get sued for that.
Probably. Shout out to the Creative Commons podcast, if there is one.
For sponsoring this episode.
So now we're just making up podcasts, we're making up words, and we're making up sponsorships.
Yeah, there's no problem with that.
Great.
What's the problem with, like, some people, like, companies and stuff, they get really upset because you mention their products and stuff. I mean, like, back in the day, it was, like, Cristal.
Right.
Like, it was Jay-Z or somebody had, like, they in their music videos, and then the Cristal got all upset.
Well, that thing was because, so that was a different thing. I see where I know your question, but that was a different thing. That was because they didn't associate with the rapper gangster. They didn't want to associate themselves. Cristal
They didn't want to. They didn't think that
They didn't like black people.
That champagne should be used to be poured on booties.
Bodies and booties. They wanted to be more.
They're
of a
just
classy
missing that whole end of the market.
That's how they made all their money, was Cristal.
Right off of the butts.
And then Jay-Z made his own to pour on his own butts. And he's winning now. Yeah. And Cristal's not. I mean, Cristal's still doing fine because it's freaking Cristal. It's disgusting. Have you ever tasted it?
No.
Cristal's gross.
Maybe I have.
I'd rather drink Dom with the Coke.
No, don't mix the Dom with the Coke. I know an individual who'd be very upset with you.
Yes.
If you mix the Dom with the Coke.
Shout out to him.
Okay. I feel like, should we keep the ball rolling?
Let's just keep it going because we'll be able to catch some good stuff from here.
Okay.
So
at least we'll be able to insert some of these sounds into people's ears.
Right. So
yeah.
Let's kind of get to the bells and whistles of what this podcast is about.
Okay.
Because as much as I love to hear myself talk, and I could just sit here and talk shit all day, we're not doing that with this podcast. We have I'm going to let Chris explain it to you. He's better at explaining these things. But there's a purpose to this podcast, and Chris is going to tell you now.
Okay, so the 5 O'Clock Hustle Podcast is for anyone and everyone who works that 9-to-5 job, but they don't want to come home and have that be it. They want to have full, prosperous lives, creating businesses, participating in athletics or, artistry, trying to do that extra thing, trying to get their hustle on after work. And for us, for me and Dre, we have a family. We got a kid each. A kid apiece. I guess we could say we got kids because we got combined.
Combined,
that's multiple kids. And so yeah, that's basically it. I mean, is there any other way I could put it?
Nah, I think you hit it. It's for me, like you said, because everybody else will take it a different way. For me, that 5 O'Clock Hustle is just not committing to just what you're doing. Like if you have a passion, a vision of something that you see yourself doing, but you may feel hindered by the standard schedule of your 9-to-5 job or, being with the kids and everything like that. It's that after hours hustle. Like you said, those after hour entrepreneurs where you're not stopping at 5 and being like, yeah, my day is over. But then also, kind of labeling yourself like that is kind of saying that you're getting over the frustration of not being able to do those things because you put those time constraints on yourselves. You know, like
Right.
people put that 9 to 5, like, oh, that's my work day now. Now I got to go watch Netflix and I got to go. No, we're not about that. We're about trying to better ourselves. So whether it's like you going to the gym, like Chris said, or whether you want to be a baseball coach and you're picking up, you know, whatever, it's that 5 o'clock. After you're done with that 5 o'clock, it'll be from 5 to 8, 5 to 12, 5 to 3 until you get back up the next morning.
That's right.
You know, it's just getting after it, making your dreams, you know, attaining your dreams, but doing it after hours, because there is something to be said about keeping your job in the process of.
Yeah. Well, especially for guys like us who, you know, we do have, like, we got some, like, we're basically new dads. I mean, you know, Kanan, Dre's son.
I'm a year and a half deep.
He's a year and a half deep, and I'm about what 5 months deep now. 5 months deep, and it's. You know, it's tough, like managing time and being able to like pursue our like, you know, our basically our dreams and our whatever it is that we want to do. Like, time management is tough, and that's another big thing that I want to talk about with this podcast, is being able to how to manage time and how to manage relationships and how to, you know, maintain, like, you know, a happy and loving home,
right,
while, you know, like, you know, reaching our goals.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, like, yeah, I mean, you know me, like, every week I got a new idea, and that's another reason why.
If you have a business where you just need ideas, hire Chris immediately. He has ideas flying out of his mouth every second.
And that's actually one of the big reasons why I want to do this podcast, because, you know, I get to this point because, I mean, all my ideas, like, I think some of them are pretty good. Some of them might be not so good.
Most of them are $1 million ideas.
But the thing is, I haven't been coding for 10 years. I can't make an app off I can't snap my fingers and, you know, and have all these things like become a reality.
Right.
And that's just one of the, like, you know, it's not just making apps. There's lots of different other things that I think of all the time. But I wanted to do something where I could say, hey, Dre, let's make a podcast. Let's do this. Let's get the ball rolling. And that's what this episode's going to be about is about getting the ball rolling, getting some momentum so you can keep that momentum. And, you know, I think from there, like, and we're going to talk about it, is like that. It's super important just to do it, because you can have all the ideas in the world, but if you don't implement it and if you don't pursue it, then it doesn't do anything. It's not worth anything. It's just words. It's just talk, and that's not worth. That's not worth nothing.
Yeah, and that's a big thing for a lot of these after hours entrepreneurs, and myself included. That was one of the habits that I had to break, was being the talk about it person. You know what I'm saying? Like, because sometimes it gets to a point where just talking about it feels like you've done enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're putting in so you're like, oh man, and I'm going to start this business and it's going to be that and that and that and that. And you're all jazzed about it because you told somebody about it, but then you haven't put in any work because you just used all your energy explaining it to somebody. And you're like, whew, that was a good little days of work. Like, you know, the idea's still out there. It's flowing. I came up with this, but like, people just don't put it into action. And I was guilty of that. I actually still am guilty of it. And this is not a podcast for us to give you our expertise, because we are in no sense of the word experts at this, and that's why we will be, you know, talking to other entrepreneurs and people like that. But we are in a position, like I said, or like Chris said, we are dads and we are in the process of building something. So as far as getting the ball rolling, I think it's so important. And what really kind of, I don't know about you, but what really kind of keeps me motivated when getting the ball rolling, because you could just have that momentum surge and then it could just drop off, and then you're like, well, absolutely, you know, like, it could just drop off. So I think that setting yourself up, and we'll talk about it more in this episode, setting yourself up in the right direction to be able to attain or get, like, you know, small victories, just so that you know that everything that you're doing is working and that you're not constantly giving up. And then another thing, maybe I'm kind of going a little too far, but those small victories kind of help your surroundings, you know, like, so if your wife is kind of like, I don't know about that, if she's able to see the small victories and be like, oh, okay, now I can buy in a little bit, you know?
Because for our wives and for other people, our parents, whoever else, like, who sees us, you know, and they're like, you got a good job, you're doing your thing, you're coming home, everything's good.
Right.
But like for us, it's like we gotta reach.
I gotta
a little
do more.
Like I love coming home and I love being able to cash a check every time I get one from my job, and I love like coming home and being able to make food. But I want to do that so much more, and it's like maybe that's selfish, but at the same time, if people like us weren't doing this kind of thing, then like the people will be missing out on a lot of good stuff.
Absolutely.
And for me, like it's just it's in my blood. I have to make things. I have to create. It's otherwise like I don't know, like I just feel like a zombie if I'm not able to create a thing. I can't. I'm not a user. I'm a maker.
Right.
You know, except for movies. I love going to the movies, and you'll probably hear a lot about that in the future. Yeah. But anyways, moving on. But you know, like it's just about making stuff, and that's what this country was founded on. It was founded on people reaching for their dreams. People all over the country, people are really pissed at Trump because he's preventing others from doing those same type of things. This is not a political podcast. We can get a little political if people want, but
Chris can get political. I'm not doing it.
I won't get political.
I don't know enough about it to be talking about it. I could share some of the frustrations that I have at least, but that's for another day.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So tell me a little bit more about, like you said, you like to make things, you like to create. Not tell me, tell our listeners, because this is the first episode. They need to know us a little better.
We want you to be a part of the conversation.
Right.
We want you to ask questions, and you know, every chance you get, like just send it. We have our Twitter set up at 5 o'clock hustle, at 5 o'clock hustle spelled out. Just send us your questions, whatever you want to say. Also, leave us some reviews on iTunes and everywhere else, because that's how more people will be able to listen to this, and we have better conversations the more people there are.
Absolutely.
So, I like to make things, you know, like.
Let me just that was good. That was some good plugging right there. I was like, we should have done that earlier, but you did it right at the perfect time. Okay, so go.
That's a call. I listen to a lot of podcasts, first of all, so I know how to swim a plug into a thing.
Yeah, that's gonna be
just saying. Anyways, so making things, it's always been important to me. Like, first of all, like I was never the best student in the world, and it's probably because I was thinking about making something else. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting there and I think of like all these crazy ideas, and then I look on the news, or I look in the app store, or I look on like, you know, like I just see it out in the world. I see my ideas come to fruition, but I didn't get to make them.
Right.
So that's always like kind of been in the back of my head. Like, with all these people out here, they're making all this stuff and, you know, making money, whatever. It's just the fact that they're doing it. There's people out there. First of all, there's thousands of podcasts out there. Like, why did it take us so long to do this? We like to talk to each other. Why don't we have microphones out front of our mouths and hashing stuff
podcasts back in the day?
Oh my gosh! Can I tell you something about how we invented podcasts? All right. To be fair, there's probably a couple of podcasts that were out there, but before podcasting was podcasting, there was I think it was a website called Ustream or something like that. And it was not necessarily a place where like it was easy to record podcasts, but I mean, it must have been 10 years ago or something.
No, it was more than that.
It was a long time ago.
Like maybe 10, 12, something like that, 10 to 12 years.
Rewind 10, 12 years ago and look at how many podcasts were on iTunes. Podcasts. That's not how you say it.
It's like a Thai dish. Pad Thai.
So, I mean, even then, like, we were trying to make stuff. It was Afternoon Shiner. Our boy, Cameron Ishtahardy, it was like, hey, like, I want to make a website, Afternoon Shiner. I don't know what it was for. It was like to just sell T-shirts or something. I was like, because I was listening to the radio a lot. I was listeing to, I think, Frosty, Heidi, and Frank.
Shout out to Frosty, Heidi, and Frank.
I know Heidi and Frank are still on the radio today, but I don't know where Frosty went. But I think he was hilarious. I don't know why they split up. It's very sad. But like, that's what inspired me. Actually, it was listening to people on the radio and like, man, they're having so much fun. Like, why are like we doing that kind of thing? And we recorded one show, and I don't remember what we talked about. I think we were just talking about like pop culture kind of stuff. Right. And you know what? There's a lot of podcasts that do that same
exact thing
today. And I was like, man, if we would have kept doing that at that time, we would probably be the biggest
thing in the top of the world right now.
But you know what? Like that, like Dre was saying, like you were saying, like we get that momentum. and then all of a sudden it drops off.
Yeah, there's no small victories. Because at that point, too, like to our, like, I guess credit, not even credit, but just for us, there wasn't really a platform for that then. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a way to really attain small victories in that regard because there was no audience for it. Like we were like, yeah, we're recording a radio show, but we're going to put it on the internet. And people were like, well, that's stupid. Why don't you just put it on the radio? And we're like, because we're going to put it on the internet. Like people weren't checking for that at the time.
I can't tell you how many times this kind of thing has happened to me in my life. It makes me so sad. Yeah. But, you know, that's why recently, and it's why we're doing this again today, 10, 12 years later, mm-hmm. is because sometimes it's not necessarily about, you know, winning. It's just about the journey. And when you can change your mindset into just being on that path and not necessarily thinking about all the time, like the end goal, right? Like that's when the ball really starts to roll. Exactly. Because you're just doing it
because you're just in it. You're just in it. You're moving with the ideas, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like everything that you're creating, you're just kind of moving along with it. And kind of like Chris was saying, you know, he's a maker. He likes to make. I'm also a creative in that regard. But my background is music. I grew up in music. My dad was a producer. The whole family is just singers and artists and writers. And my grandfather was a saxophone player and, you know, there's all kinds. So I grew up in music. And I just love to create music. I mean, Chris would come over to the house and be like, hey, dude, like I'm picking you up. We're going to hang out. And I'm just be like, yeah, I'll be ready. And he gets there, knocks on the door. Like I'm sitting there in the studio, like banging out beats like with my dad or whatever. But I'm also a maker and a creator. And so a lot of the things that, like basically what we were talking about, is just there was always a stop and go point. There was always a stop where I'd have these high highs of motivation and then no rewards or no results. And then I'd drop off and then I'd go back and blah, 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 blah. But it wasn't just a consistent flow of getting the ball rolling. So once, like Chris said, once you change that mindset and once I changed like, hey, I'm just going to do this, then it just became more of a fun thing. And it wasn't like a pressure on myself to create, you know, like, like I'm pretty sure like with your ideas, like there's no pressure for you to come up with these ideas. Yeah. You're just coming up with them off the cuff, you know? And if we had the resources to be able to make them, then we do it, you know? Like, so it's just about that getting the ball rolling to eventually get those resources so that when Chris has an idea, he can turn it into an industry, a business, a store, whatever the case, an app, whatever the case may be. And then if I have an idea, because like you said, there's been so many times where I'm like, man, that would be such a cool song if somebody sang about this and blah, blah, or just even musically, just like nowadays you listen to a lot of music and they've got the hi-hats going at like, you know, 32 beats, you know, so it's just super fast. Right. I was doing that in 2005, but everybody thought it was weird, you know? And now it's like all over, there's like all these rapid fire drums and everything like that. So it's just, like you said, it's the timing is a lot of it too.
And I'm an avid podcast listener and if you're listening to this podcast about, you know, afternoon hustling anything, entrepreneurship, creating anything, you might have heard of Gary Vee. And he always talks about how the audience has to catch up with you. Right. So what you're doing, like they're not automatically gonna care about you. Right. They don't care.
They don't give a
right now, like we're like, you know, we would have just introduced ourselves and said what a podcast is for our first podcast and been done with it. But you guys don't care who we are. You don't care what we do, like even what we do. Like we got to prove ourselves before like any of the stuff matters to you. But you know, we're trying to give you value. We want to make sure that the stuff, because you're listening to this because you want something from it. You want to be able to become a 5 o'clock hustler. You want to get your shit going, so you can pursue your own dreams, and that's what we're trying to do here. So in the future. This episode isn't exactly our normal format. We're gonna have guests who have done this thing, people who are doing it now, and we want to make sure that, you know, you're hearing stuff that you want to hear, so you can get some value. At the same time, we get some value because we learn from all these people, and hopefully we can keep that ball rolling for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to learn from y'all's experiences. We want to learn from your mistakes, and we want you guys to do the same from us, you know. That's why we're kind of starting this platform. I think it'll be a great community to have, like the people of, those 5 o'clock hustlers, those after hours hustlers, where we really can feed off of each other, bounce off of each other, and kind of motivate each other to keep the ball rolling. Like say, hey, like, if a listener calls in and says, or writes in and says, I have this one idea, but I'm really struggling to do this, be able to give ideas that helps them. Oh man, that's awesome. I didn't even think of that, because a lot of times you get so stressed with trying to keep the ball rolling, you miss valuable opportunities to, progress, like, and that's a huge thing for me, is that motivation, just to really block out all the nonsense that's going on in your head and to hear it from somebody else who's going through the same thing, to continue it going. So,
and that's what I like about this form. What we're trying to do is, because there's people out there who are like the top marketers, the top, CEOs of whatever companies. We're the complete opposite of that. We haven't necessarily done anything worth noting. Like we might have made a couple of cool things here and there. For me, like I don't have anything to show you. This podcast is the first thing I'll ever have to show you.
Right.
But at the same time, that's the perspective that we want. We're the listeners. We're bringing these guests on because we want to learn and we want to grow, and we want you to grow with us. So that's what this podcast is. 5 o'clock hustlers. It's the after hours entrepreneurs. It's the weekend warriors. It's anyone who wants to be better at something when they have that 9-to-5 job, and whether or not you have a family, that it doesn't really matter, but it's going to be really helpful for people like us.
Right.
So
absolutely. Shout out to all the 5 o'clock hustlers out there. We know that you're out there. We want to know who you are. So hit us up on Twitter or on all our social media, which is
5 o'clock hustle, at 5 o'clock hustle spelled out. Our website is 5 o'clock hustle with a 5. Somebody's squatting on that URL, but
whoever you are,
eventually.
Shout out to you, but come up off it, bro.
Come up off it. We will give you our
first t-shirt.
Maybe even a coffee mug.
Yeah, man. So connect with us. We want to hear from you. We want to grow with you, like Chris said. So let's go on this journey together. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let Chris close it out.
That was episode 0 of the 5 o'clock hustle podcast. Write in, leave us a review. Can't wait to talk to you next time. Send us some questions on our social media. Again, at 5 o'clock hustle spelled out. And we'll see you then.